Dr. Saliha, it's such a pleasure to have you on Virgin Radio Dubai.
And the pleasure is mine. Thank you.
So, Dr. Saliha, you are the founder of Lighthouse. You're a clinical psychologist. And we were just talking about Men's Mental Health Awareness Month earlier, which is the month of June. And you said you've worked primarily with men over the last 10 years in Dubai. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my training was as a generalist, and so I've worked with children, adolescents. My expertise earlier in my career was parenting, and it still is. I'm also the mother of 4 children, so the lesson continues. But my clinical work kind of took a side seat, and I would say that my practice really became about transformational counseling. This is where I'm working with very high-performing men, typically that are senior partners within firms or partners or directors or in the C-suite. And that has been the profile of the male that I have worked with over the last, I would say, probably about 8-9 years.
Wow. And why do you think that is? Why do you think, I guess, a lot of men are now a little bit more open to getting therapy?
So I think they come in because they are extremely stressed and they have no one to speak to. And so they say, I'm going to go work on stress management. And then when we sit together, they realize that there's actually a huge mountain under this tip of what shows up as stress for them.
Wow.
And in that mountain is a lot of unprocessed, undigested, unnamed emotions and experiences that they've had throughout their life. And that's the work that we end up doing.
And so I've never had therapy. I've always wanted to come to therapy, and I will book a session at some point, but I've never had therapy. What kind of things does a clinical psychologist talk through with someone when they come to therapy?
Oh, it can literally be anything. But clinical psychologist or counseling psychologist or a psychologist or a therapist who's been trained in psychology can help you deal with clinical issues such as depression, anxiety, bipolar, eating disorders, addictions, or life circumstances like grief and bullying, workplace bullying, relationship issues, parenting issues across the board. So it can be life circumstances where you feel overwhelmed, or it can be where you now actually are now qualifying for a diagnosis and you would need to go seek talk therapy, treatment, evidence-based treatment. Because a lot of times people say, well, I can just talk to a friend. The friend doesn't know evidence-based treatment for which is used in talk therapy. And so you would need to see a psychologist or a mental health professional for that.
So this month, the month of June, is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. Why is a month like this so important?
Well, I think it's so important that we talk about men's mental health. Men are underdiagnosed. They're 4 times likely to die of suicide. Actually, suicide is the 7th leading cause of death for men worldwide. They're 4 times likely to abuse substances and really are far more lonely, don't have access to the resources such as friends, family, support because of the cultural stigma that goes with being a man, the patriarchal values that are instilled in a man about how they should talk about their emotional life. So they don't have access to a lot of those things that women have access to. Women have their own struggle, don't get me wrong, but men are actually quite isolated in their struggle. So I'm really glad that we have this month where we can name that.
Do you think men put more pressure on themselves, or do you think that just comes from society or family or, pressure from friends?
It's everything. Just like women have pressure about their bodies, you don't know where that comes from. It's almost like it's in the water that you grow up with. Like you have to have this kind of difficult, complicated relationship with your body. It's very rare that you find a woman who hasn't gone through that work consciously, who just kind of grows up that way. And so men have that. And I think a lot of that has to do with this patriarchal system. And patriarchal has its values, but I'm talking the values when they kind of become restrictive and narrowly defining what is a man and what is a woman and what should a man do and what should a woman do. And a man should not have feelings and a man should man up, and everybody kind of knows what man up means.
Yeah.
How do they know that? It's where you deny, you dismiss, you disengage from that emotional life of yours, and you only tend to a few things, which is to produce, to have power, to procreate, to protect. These are the values that a man grows up with, and that creates a lot of pain and pressure for men.
Wow. What are some of the most common mental health issues that people face today, men and women?
So common issues in the UAE or common issues worldwide would be depression and anxiety. Those are the two that are the main, I would say, majority of the people. 1 out of 4 actually are struggling with something like this.
Wow.
Now, men tend to have a different presentation when it comes to depression or anxiety. They what they might present with is stress or burnout or substance use, such as addictions, where women might actually present with the depression or anxiety. So according to the World Health Organization, men might present with substance use or antisocial behaviors, getting into fights, impulse disorders, that type of stuff, acting out, where women tend to act in, which is where the depression and anxiety can show up. But men and women both have depression and anxiety, and I would say those would be the two most common.
What are some of the differences, for example, or are there any differences with mental health issues for men and women in Dubai, for example? Is that different to anywhere else in the world, or is it kind of the same everywhere?
It's kind of the same everywhere. Here you have another layer of culture where I think in other parts of the world, we are starting to talk more about mental health and mental health, and therapy just seems to be like one of the things you do, like going to the dentist and, going to getting your yearly checkup. Like, people have a therapist, and it's starting to become quite a lot more destigmatized. I've been here in the UAE for 15 years, and I've seen a rapid transformation. And that's the thing about Dubai, and that's the thing about the UAE that I love, is that things happen very quickly here.
Yeah.
We find out about something yesterday and it's done and delivered tomorrow, So this is what I appreciate about the pace with which we've adopted and started talking about mental health here in the UAE. When I first came here, there was just a handful of psychologists. And I remember saying, well, I'm going to go talk about mental health. And everybody was like, no, you're not. And, opening a mental health clinic was the first. They didn't know what to do with that. And so now, obviously, there's so much of that happening. And so I'm very happy about that. But the presentation is typically the same, with just more stigma that we're working through. There's a lot of cultural and religious misconceptions that can come in to the stigma. They add a little bit of a layer. And I would say, for example, I've had people that were Muslim that come in and say, I'm really struggling. I can't tell my mom that I'm coming here because she just told me to pray about it.
Yeah, right.
And talking to a mental health professional is only if things go really, really wrong or you're on the edge of psychosis or something. And so it's still seen as something that, quote, crazy people do. And that's just not right. I have a therapist. I see my therapist weekly, and my children have a therapist. This is not something you wait for things to go wrong, but it is something that you can start to address, so you are dealing with it more of a preventative way rather than a treatment way. And so, yeah, I would say that they're actually the same with this kind of cultural, like, you don't talk to a random stranger about your family's problems. You don't air your dirty laundry. There's a layer of like machismo, I would say, in certain cultures that live here in Dubai, where, you know, what it means to be a man, it's still very much like you have no emotion. And where in other parts of the world we're starting to deconstruct that, we have a little bit more work to do here, but we're on our way.
Wow. And how does social media, for example, affect mental health?
Oh, there's so many different ways it affects mental health. For the positive, we are talking about mental health. This will be aired somewhere on social media. Someone will hear it. It will resonate with them. They might actually say, I need to go actually talk to a therapist. I didn't know you could go for relationship issues or work pressure or having a difficult boss. You can go see a psychologist for that. I didn't know that. So that's where awareness has gone really through the roof when it comes to social media and the reach that it has. Now, the downside of that is that it's really in the way you use it. It's not social media that is the bad guy. It's actually how it's being used. And if we're not very conscious, it is designed to have you be addictive. It is designed to keep you on there longer. And so there are people that are spending hours and hours on social media where they're not engaging with the life around them, where they're not tending to their relationships or their work in a focused way, where they're not tending to their families in a focused way, where they're comparing themselves to other people's highlight reel. Those are the ways where it can be actually quite corrupting to the human spirit and to human relationships.
I find this comparison thing happens a lot on social media because, like you said, everybody only puts their highlights, their best parts of their day or their life. And I guess it's even for adults. I mean, teenagers are a whole different story, young teenage boys, for example. But for adults, it's difficult, even as a woman, to not see that and not get affected.
Yeah, it is. And no matter how much we say, okay, this was just 1 second of their day, and then what happened before, what happened after, we don't know anything. It's just that it's very hard to convince your mind. And you are far more vulnerable when you are feeling low, when you have like some issues with your body, or you feel bloated, or you ate too much last night, and then you see someone looking chiseled and looking so fit, and then the self-esteem takes a bigger hit. And so when you're vulnerable and you're online and you're comparing yourself, it's far more hurtful to your self-esteem and to your self-worth than if you were to just go on when you're having a highlight day also, you know. So it really is about using it very consciously. I don't let my young teens be on social media. It's not something that we've decided we're going to delay it until maybe they're 18. My daughter is 18 now, and she's still not on it, and we're having that conversation now. But I feel like she had so many struggles with the things that she was dealing with just based off of just what she was hearing in the environment and life and puberty and going through all these body changes. And by the way, boys are absolutely affected by body image. Especially now, I've seen more and more men and boys be affected by body image issues, harder on themselves. Everybody just looks so fit, and there's just like a lot of fitness stuff and a lot of health stuff. And you just, and some of that is just genes for those people. They're genetically like that. Like you're just never going to be like that. And so they're comparing themselves to people that are just, you know, outside of their, outside of what they should be comparing themselves to. And that actually is quite, it's really, really, really hurtful and really corrosive to that self-esteem, especially during those vulnerable years, but even on after that.
How does someone know they're going through some mental health issues if they're feeling, like, what are some of the signs?
Yeah. So the first sign you will see is that the things that used to give you joy don't give you joy anymore. that's going to be a main hallmark sign. We call it a hallmark of depression or anxiety. Like you're just feeling not the things that you used to do, you don't do anymore. Now, I'm not saying you jump into medication at that point, but you say, something's going on here. Then you're going to see major changes in your thoughts, behaviors, and feelings.
Yeah.
It's going to be very disruptive to your life. It's going to be persistent. So this is not something that lasts 2 days. It's going to last for weeks, and most of the day, every day. So there's going to be a frequency, there's going to be an intensity, there's going to be a duration that we're looking at, and we're going to see that it's actually interrupting and causing a lot of impairment in your day-to-day functioning. So are you able to work in the same way you used to? Are you able to be in relationships in the same way you used to? In men, I see that it presents as irritability and anger, that you'll just agitate it a lot more. And you're like, I'm yelling at people that I shouldn't be yelling at. This is not who I am. This is a sign that maybe there's things that you need to address. And when we think about mental health issues, there's a lot of misconception about what is mental health. And I always say to people, like, think about it on a spectrum, just like you would see your physical health, right? It's on a spectrum. There are days where you are sleeping and you're eating right and everything, you're tending to your journaling and you're having your high confidence moments, and all of a sudden you feel like, things are physically, I feel like I have energy, right? I have energy. Then you start to think about your physical health. Okay, maybe you got sick a little bit, or maybe you ate too much, or maybe you stayed out too late, or maybe you drank too much, or something happened where you now are starting to feel like physically not at your optimal. And then you stay in that place. Maybe you stay out for too many nights in a row. Maybe you don't eat right for too many nights or days. All of a sudden you stay that way for months and months, you're gonna develop a physical illness, right? And that physical illness could be diabetes, or it could be some GI issues, or you could gain weight, or something where you feel that you are not in your optimal. That, or bloating, for example, like that, all of that, if it sustains, you're going to develop a physical illness. It's the same way with mental health. Mental health and mental illness is not the same thing.
Okay.
We all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. And there are days where I'm feeling like I got it all. Like I'm really switched on. I slept right. I took my lion's mane. I've hydrated. I've exercised. And I physically and mentally feel like I am optimal. And then I don't do the things that usually give me energy mentally or physically, and I start to slip down that. And I start to become mentally unwell. But I'm not mentally ill yet.
Okay.
And I would say that you don't hit a diagnosis right away. You're going to have days where you're feeling low, and then your inner critic shows up and they're going to start beating on you, and then you start to feel harsher on yourself, and then you start to have difficulty in your relationship, and then your work starts to compromise, and then you start to become hypercritical of the emails you send out, so it takes you like 3 hours to send out, and then it develops into an anxiety disorder. It's for a sustained period, and then it becomes a diagnosis. And it's still, I would say, that it is a mental health condition, meaning that if we treat it with talk therapy, and if it becomes really serious, then we would involve medication. But we don't just say you're mentally ill because you are depressed. Mental illness, I usually say that is for people that are chronically they're going to have chronic conditions that need medication and treatment, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, eating disorders. That would be an illness that I say that this is going to take long term. Even addictions could be considered an illness, where we say this is going to require long-term efforts from you. But depression and anxiety are treatable, highly treatable. You can learn coping skills. You don't necessarily need to be on medication for them. It can be treated through talk therapy. So it actually is quite easy. No, I shouldn't say that. I should say it's actually quite treatable. And there are people that are living with anxiety, that are living with depression, that actually don't know that if you go in and speak to a mental health professional after 8 to 12 and up to 20, 25 sessions, which is about 6 months, you are going to feel better. And so why not put in that effort? And then it's sustained. Right? So you have to, once you go into a depressive episode, you can pull yourself back out because of the techniques and the tools that you learned with a psychologist. So it's not something you should just wait. I think it's something that you could even do even before that happens.
What if someone is experiencing anxiety or depression to some degree on a day-to-day basis? What are some things they can do, immediately to help them?
So I will say anxiety and low mood, right? Depression is a diagnosis.
Okay.
And we have a long list of things that you need to do in order to qualify for a depressive, a mood disorder, a depressive episode. And so every human being has anxiety. It is our survival mechanism. If we didn't have anxiety, we wouldn't look to both ways when we cross the street. We wouldn't put our seatbelt on. We wouldn't show up on time for this podcast. That's anxiety saying, hey, come on, we need to get there. But anxiety becomes disruptive and unhelpful when it's just there all the time and it's not quieting and it's actually getting in the way of you being able to live a healthy, functional life and being able to get your work done in a healthy way and in a timely way. So you want to think about low mood and anxiety, and also want to think about that on a spectrum. Low mood, I would pay attention to that. If you're having low mood, I'm not a psychologist who just says, okay, go to a psychologist. You have to do mind, body, everything. I would say really pay attention to your gut bacteria, gut microbiome, the whole world that lives inside of you that you need to tend to. And most of us are not very tending to our gut microbiome, and that really determines our mood quite a lot. So tend to your gut microbiome, tend to your movement. We are never meant to be the sedentary. We are not a sedentary being, and we are sitting a lot more than we've ever sat in our life, and we need that movement for those neurochemicals, for that energy. And so movement would be an important part of it. Sunlight would be an important part of it, especially in the summer months here. We just don't get sunlight. And so how can we wake up early, get that a little bit of sunlight, go out throughout the day? Sure, it's going to be a little bit sweaty, but just getting in contact with the sun a little bit even, so that you are maintaining some of those chemicals that are released in your body. And then hydration, etc. Those would be a very, very important component of good mental health. And then I would say that yes, you should have some techniques in your toolbox, whether it's from cognitive behavioral therapy or ACT or DBT. These are therapy techniques that you can use in order to pull yourself out of some of those states that you might get into. Like I said, low mood is normal. Anxiety is normal. Now, if it happens for 2 weeks, every day, all the time, and it's disrupting your life, then it qualifies for a diagnosis. But anxious moments we can all have. We can all panic before we get on stage, and we all get nervous. Now, this is where you would say, okay, put your hand on your heart and your belly, take some deep breaths, calm your nervous system. Remember you are safe, because at that time you're feeling threatened. So these are all, and that was from polyvagal. And so these are all techniques that you would learn from a psychologist, that you don't need to be in therapy for the rest of your life. You just go in, build your toolbox, and then you say, okay, when I'm panicked, this is what I will do. When I'm anxious, this is what I will do. When I'm having low mood, this is what I will do. So you don't get to a place where you then hit a major depression or a generalized anxiety or a different kind of anxiety.
What if someone can't afford therapy? What are some of the things they can do to help their mood or their low mood or anxiety?
So we have free, and I call them support groups, but they're really not support groups. They're actually therapeutic spaces, I would say, because they're all led by a professional that is licensed. So you have free access to a mental health professional related to a topic. So for example, men's mental health, we have a consultant psychiatrist who is a male that leads that group every month for men. And so this is a free space for men to go in and talk to other men about what they're going through. And that's once or twice a month, depending on the month that we're in.
Okay.
So these are, and then we have one for Palestine, or we have one for heartbreak, we have one for grief, we have one for infertility. There are so many different, we have over 20 groups running at the Lighthouse that are all led by licensed clinicians that you have free access to. Now, that might be like, well, I don't want to go in front of other people. And this is the stuff that you're going to have to work through, that you're going in front of other people who are just like you, who are struggling with something just like you, and we are all bound to confidentiality. It is a safe space, and then you take that step and you go. So that's just one resource that you have. And there are countless others online that are doing things like this. So you could literally have one once a week somewhere in the world. These groups are all online, by the way. They can be accessed from anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So this would be something that I would say that there are actually free resources. What I would say is that, try to find one that has a licensed, qualified clinician, because I've seen some things go a little bit sideways in other groups, and it just doesn't seem like. So I would say go with someone who is a qualified clinician. Follow Instagram accounts of qualified clinicians. I know there's a lot of mental health advocates out there, and with all the good intention that they have, sometimes they can do a lot of damage because of the things they're saying. And I'm thinking, no, that's not sensitive, or that is not something that you want to say to someone who's hurting right now. And so they can be quite hurtful, actually, even though I'm sure they have very good intention. And they're speaking from their own experience, but then they're projecting that experience onto everyone. But that is not the case. Just because you went through grief like that, or you dealt with stress like that, doesn't mean someone else is going to do it that way. So that can be quite harmful to someone who already feels so much under pressure, and now you're telling me to run an hour a day because that's how you got out of depression. And it's like, well, I can't run an hour a day. Can I just walk up and down the hallway a few times? This is where I'm at right now, So I think it's really important that you follow qualified, licensed clinicians for your mental health advice. You can follow the other guys for something else, but if you're saying, actually, this is part of my toolbox, then follow the licensed, qualified clinicians.
And what about if someone's friend or family member is anxious or has a low mood or depressed? What are some of the things that they can do to support that person?
This is a great question. And so to address this need, the Lighthouse brought mental health first aid to the UAE from Australia. Mental health first aid is in 23 countries, and it is an evidence-based program that is a response to how do you sensitively respond to someone who is struggling and or in crisis. And so I would recommend that for sure you are going to meet someone. For sure, let's just put that on the table. You will have someone in your life that is going to be struggling with their mental health. Notice I didn't say has a diagnosis, but who will be struggling with their mental health at some point or another. It is not your job to diagnose them. You might not even feel qualified to counsel them, but you can be a first responder. And that is what mental health first aid does. It teaches you how to be a first responder. It is a 10-hour course. We do it once a month at the Lighthouse. You get certification for 3 years, and we have monthly support that is free of charge for all mental health first aiders. So it is a place where you can go to and say, listen, I try to do that with my colleague. He really looked like he was really out of shape, and I'm I approached him and I had this conversation and it went a little bit sideways. And what do you think? And then you get coaching, basically, or counseling on how you could deal with that. But sometimes someone comes and tells you that I'm really not well and I'd rather not live. And they might have that conversation, and that can feel very overwhelming for you as a first responder. And that is also another place where you can go and say, I feel very overwhelmed, I feel I'm holding too much, and that's a safe place. So I would recommend that you learn how to sensitively respond to someone who looks like they might be struggling, or they're having a full-blown panic attack. You need to know how to respond to that. And I think it's just one of those skills that you need in today's world.
That's so interesting. I feel like everybody needs to take that course, because sometimes I feel like I respond maybe not in the best way when I hear, especially, for example, I talk to a lot of people on the radio, they tell me things and I just don't know sometimes how to respond.
Yes.
I listen, but I don't know how to respond.
Yeah, and I think that's really a very, very common experience, because then we end up saying, oh, well, just look on the positive side. Yeah. And that is very dismissive to someone who is struggling, because you don't think I thought about that? You don't think I want to think about the positive side? I can't see the positive side because you're neurochemically altered. You are altered. Your lens is altered. Your aperture is narrowed. So you only see the bad side. You cannot see the... So how do you deal with someone like that? And so saying some of these things can actually be quite dismissive. And when you say things like, oh, but at least you have a job, or at least you have some fun people you get to meet on the radio. Yeah. Like if you come to me and say, I'm really struggling, but look at all the amazing things you have, and this is me trying to be helpful. And of course, I have all the good intentions to try to make you feel better. But in that, I'm actually invalidating your experience. So instead, saying things like, Maz, tell me about that. How are you? How are you doing?
I feel like I'm having a therapy session.
Right? Just holding some space for that, making some space for that. How are you coping with things that are not working for you? Who are you speaking to about this? Just understanding and helping you understand yourself. And saying, and I'm not a counselor. Let's just say I'm not a counselor. I am a counselor, but let's just say I'm not. I would say, you know what? How would you feel if I went online, did a little bit of research, found some clinicians in different clinics at different price points? How would you feel if we went in for an appointment? And I'll book it for you. Because at that point, maybe they feel so overwhelmed, and it has happened to me even. I'm so overwhelmed that I can't even think about booking the appointment. Yeah. I don't want to look at my calendar. I don't want to. So how about, okay, first let's call out of work tomorrow. Let's take a mental health day and let's get an appointment. Let's get you kind of shored up and let's get you in to see a therapist. So you kind of become their first responder, and that's what you learn in the course. How do you deal with someone who is struggling? Not how do you counsel someone, how do you respond to someone and get them to the help that they need?
You mentioned a mental health day. I feel like this should be really common in workplaces. Some places around the world allow that, I think in a lot of Scandinavian countries. But I feel like this should be a common practice where sometimes you don't feel 100% and it should be allowed.
Yeah. And I don't think we should wait till we're just not 100%, because I never feel 100%. So maybe I'd be like, taking mental
every day.
Health, every day. But it's not about not feeling 100%. It's just that maybe you got some bad news last night and you just didn't sleep well and you're just not able to pull it together to go into work. Yeah. Because we're all going to have problems in our life. Yeah. And the problems don't go away as you get older. Like, they just get bigger and different. How can you learn to compartmentalize some of that? That's going to be a very important skill. How can you say, I'm going to compartmentalize that, I'm going to take that to the therapist, or I'm going to compartmentalize that and I'm going to come back to at work, and then I'm going to show up to work. But there are days where the compartment just ain't compartmentalizing, right? It just ain't compartmental. It's not happening. And so how do you, on those days, give yourself permission to say, I'm either going to work from home or I'm going to take a day. And I think people call in sick, but they don't take sick leave. They just call in sick that day.
Yeah.
That's what's happening right now. I see a lot of that happening where people are taking sick days, and I think that's okay. Take your sick day.
Yeah.
And you're not well.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be physically like coughing and sneezing, but you actually are not feeling mentally well or emotionally well, if mentally is too triggering of a word.
So for Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, what is your message to men and why this month is important and what they should do?
For me, I have 2 boys and a husband and a father and a brother, and I see their life, and all of the clients that I work with and counsel, and to all the men out there, I would say that it feels very lonely to be a man. And I know that, and I see that. It's very, very lonely to be a man. And you are not alone. And I know people say that it's okay to not be okay, but really the society doesn't give you permission to not be okay. When you are not okay, I know that people judge you. I know that people think of you as weak because we just aren't in that world yet where people are saying it's okay to not be okay, but then they still secretly judge you. And I don't think that's okay. And so you have to give yourself permission to go get the support you need wherever you may need it, whether it's in a support group, which is a safe place, whether it's with a mental health professional who understands men's issues because they have particular types of issues. Like I said, the pressure, they're measured by their productivity. They are measured by their worth is measured by how much they produce or how much they earn. Everything is tied up with that. And so I see that, I acknowledge that, and I think if people don't understand that, then they don't understand men. And I think that men, to the man that I am speaking to right now, I would say give yourself permission to go speak to a mental health professional to just orient yourself to your inner life. You have a vast inner life, a whole emotional life that society just hasn't given you permission to access. And I'm saying give yourself permission because life actually holds a lot more. And there's a lot more joy and a lot more meaning when you start to integrate those emotions into your day-to-day rather than wait for the explosion to happen or wait for the destruction to happen.
Dr. Saliha, where can we follow your journey? Where can we come and see you?
So the Lighthouse Arabia, we have a whole team of psychologists that do work with men, that work with women, children, families, couples, everything across the board really. And for following me, I would be on Instagram, and I'm also on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.